So it's the story of Jesus' life and death and resurrection according to a man called Matthew. And you're looking for chapter 26, so it's quite near the end of the book. And then you're going to look for verse, they've got little numbers, verse 17. And that is what you're looking for before we get organized for the next part, which is the sermon video.
Excuse me, Tony?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Who's that? Oh, it's Greg. Yeah. Hi, Greg.
Sorry to interrupt you. I was just thinking, you always say that we should be asking more questions. Well, I've got a question.
Okay, go for it.
Is that all right? Is that?
Yeah. Why not?
Okay. Well, we always have communion at the start of the month. Is that like a church rule or something? Like, do we have to do it?
Well, that's an interesting phrase. We always. It doesn't take long to start traditions, does it? Like in a family or in a church. Usually, if you do something more than once, then people start to say, "We always do this." I do it myself. I tell my own children that as when I was a child, we used to always go on long car trips over the left. I think we probably only did it twice. People also add the word "but" to the start, often when they use that phrase. So they say, "But we always," which is usually a way to stop things changing, because I think most of us feel that doing things the way we've always done is safer. It's easier. We don't have to think. We don't have to make decisions. So the short answer, Greg, is no. We don't have to have communion every month. It's not a rule. In fact, we didn't always used to have it every month, but I think it's important. We think it's important, and we like to do it regularly.
Tony, can I ask a question then? It's me, Chloe.
Yeah, okay.
So is communion just a tradition then?
Well, that's an interesting word, isn't it? A tradition, and just a tradition. Families and religions are known for being stuffed with traditions. As you know, we're all fascinated by this man, Jesus of Nazareth, and his Jewish faith, because he was Jewish. So that Jewish faith is rooted in family, and as a religion, it has as many traditions as any other. It seems to me those traditions are not just something that happens just because they did something twice, but are carefully crafted and designed. So they get rituals, festivals. We celebrated one last Sunday, and we talked about the Pentecost festival. And these things were given to them, designed, crafted, created, not just to keep them together, but to provoke them, to remind them, each generation, of who God was, of what he had been doing, what he was doing, what he is doing, about who they are, and about what they were made to be. So communion is something that does the same for me.
Wait. So did Jesus have communion?
Well, not exactly. Jesus was Jewish. So arguably the high point of their traditions during the year was something called the Passover, which the Davies family told us a wee bit earlier on. So that's where you gathered around a table in your home, and you remembered that God rescued your people from slavery in Egypt. Now in Jesus' day, that had been happening. The Passover had been being celebrated for over 1,000 years. So they had set foods, they had set questions, set drinks you would have at different times in the meal, set phrases. There would be a host who would lead the company through the ceremony and the meal. And in fact, they had children scripted to ask questions. And then when the adults gave the answers back, that reminded them all about this story in Exodus about a God who hears the cry and who acts to bring justice and freedom, who says that every life matters.
So why do we have communion and not Passover then? Good
question. So in the stories we've got about Jesus' life and his death and his resurrection, he has these 12 disciples, students, followers, and most of them are probably teenagers. And as that particular Passover festival came around during the third year that Jesus is doing all the things we know about, and they would have been expecting a whole lot of stuff. They would have expecting Jesus to be the host because he was the rabbi, he was the teacher. They would have expected to break bread. They would have expected different kind of cups of wine to be drunk during the meal. They would have expected to sing psalms of a certain kind to remind them of certain things. And they would have been waiting with all these things set down for Jesus to say, take, eat, because so they could start. I guess the feeling would have been like maybe at a wedding or something when the uncle stands up to say grace and goes on for ages and ages, or in your case, Greg, when I was saying grace at your wedding and everybody's just desperate to get the meal going. So they were waiting for Jesus to say, take, eat. But the last thing they expected was for Jesus to say, take, eat. This is my body. I've sometimes tried to think of something that I could say today that would be as shocking as this would have been for him back then, but the only kind of things I can think of would get this shut down or get me arrested or maybe get us going viral. So I'm not going to say any of them, but loads of people just would have been totally shocked. What is he talking about? Is this about cannibalism? Is this about eating flesh and blood? I don't think that's the case. I think that what's happening is that Jesus has taken something that's been going on for thousands of years, and he has the courage or even the brass neck to actually change it, change these Jewish symbols to be about something different.
So did Jesus try and get rid of Passover then?
No, Jesus was really careful to say he wasn't throwing any of this stuff out, but he did say he was changing it, or maybe changing the way they understood it. He was taking a 1,000-year-old tradition and saying it's actually about more than you realize. It's about your story, but it's not just limited to 1,000 years ago. You're thinking about freedom of slavery in Egypt, or maybe you're hoping for freedom from the Romans, but what God's doing is about freedom from something far, far bigger. Their expectations haven't been wrong, they've actually just been too small. That Jesus is talking about something called the kingdom. He's talking about a freedom from the addiction, the propensity we have to muck things up that's called sin, a freedom from death, taking away all the barriers that get in the way of the relationships we have with each other and with God, and anything that gets in the way of God putting his creation project back on track. And he said, he talks about at different times that this has always been the case. It's not something new. It's been there in Exodus, it's been there in Jeremiah, it's been all the way through all these scriptures.
So why do we use bread and wine then?
So bread and wine would have been part of the Passover meal, but in a different way now. I think the bread in particular, it's in there in the Lord's Prayer, give us our daily bread. Bread was a huge symbol of life and God's provision, but also it was about sharing. So I don't think it's about the eating. I don't think it's about eating flesh. I think it's about sharing. It's about the breaking and the sharing that we now get to take part. And the blood goes along with that, because blood was a sign of promises. It was a sign of something called covenant. It was something that symbolized life. In Leviticus, it says life is in the blood, but also sacrifice. So there was a system of connecting with God, and often blood was used in the sacrifice, sometimes sprinkled on all the people, so they were included. And now the bread and the wine are signs that we are included in what God's doing. We get to be part. It's always been about that. But now, instead of the temple, it's focused all on Jesus, who's taken all those barriers away.
So why a meal then? Why didn't Jesus just tell them this stuff instead?
Well, I've sometimes tried to imagine how Jesus' disciples would have been reacting to what was going on at this point. You've got Peter, who's already said he's been furious with Jesus for talking about dying. He doesn't want to see a Messiah talk like that. You've got Thomas and others who show time and time again they've only really got a vague idea of what Jesus is talking about. You've got James and John who keep asking him if they can be like on his side when he gets some sort of throne and he's got a new empire. And yet here he's talking like it's all at the end, like that they've lost. So they must have been utterly either disappointed or shocked or scandalized. And just like they don't understand it and didn't understand it then, I still don't fully understand what is going on here. But I don't mind that. I don't think it's something I can't get a hold of. I just think it's something I'll never get to the end of. It's too big and too deep and too real and true to pin down into an explanation or a few words. It's actually a mystery, not a mystery that's confusing, but a mystery that I love and that I need and that teaches me every time I take part in it. So I think if it could be explained, if it could be labeled, boxed, packaged, put in a set of bullet points, then God would have done that, but instead he gave us a meal, an act that I get to take part in, we get to take part in, that was designed to help us to feel part of it, and also to make us think and to make us ask questions, just like you two have been doing. I suppose we better get on with it. This is the table, not of the church, but of the Lord. It's to be made ready for those who love him and those who want to love him more. So come, you who have much faith and you who have little. You who've been here often and you who've not been here for a long time. Come not because you understand, but because you are understood. Not because I invite you, but because our Lord Jesus Christ invites us.